And just like that, it's August. We're officially in the full swing of summer, and I gotta say, I'm not enjoying it. Don't get me wrong, I love the sunshine, but I'm not really a fan of the unbearable heat. So to beat the summertime sadness, we're jumping back into the Marikey Meadow to explore a new environment. Time to cool down with a big ol' scoop of ice cream at Fiona's Flavors, the Marikey Meadow ice cream shop. A lot of you were really interested in hearing more about my updated gouache illustration process, so we'll be chatting about that today as well. I think it's perfectly natural that as artists, our creative process, painting process, sketching process, it's always changing. It changes as we develop our skills, learn new techniques, and sometimes it changes depending on our mood. I for one go through phases where I'm in a very explorative, playful mood, wanting to try a lot of new things. It makes for a really fun challenge to kind of shatter your regular process and do something a little bit different. And other times, I'm in a phase where I just need some cozy creativity. I want to fall back on systems or habits that I know work well for me and that I'm confident in. This year, I've been in much more of a playful mood, and that's definitely reflected itself in how I've gone about my paintings. I think this illustration is a perfect example of that. So let's start from the beginning. Phase 1, brainstorming. If you watched my last sketchbook tour, you saw the very early brainstorm sketches for Fiona's Flavors. I was having a little bit of a Marikey Meadow sketch session, brainstorming some new characters and potential environments, and this little ice cream shop began to emerge. Y'all know, I love ice cream. If we had dessert soulmates, ice cream would be mine.
Rain or shine, summer or winter,
I will not turn it down. Anywho, so I came back to this idea at the beginning of July with a few more messy sketches. Oftentimes I'll spend more time in the brainstorming phase than I did for this one. I didn't even fill the whole page with sketches. I didn't flesh out a lot of the props. Basically, I finalized the thumbnail, sketched out the characters and the sign design, and called it good. Which brings us to the next phase. Phase 2, sketching. This is a big area where my illustration process has definitely changed this year. So it used to be that I'd throw my thumbnail sketch and character sketches into my digital drawing software. That way I could make a perspective grid, easily move things around, zoom in on all the little details. It was very convenient. But I do think it held me back in some ways. Because I had tools like a perspective grid and the undo button, I wasn't really relying on my own perspective skills and drawing skills. I could put a mark down very helter-skelter and just move it where I wanted it to go. But earlier this year, I started freehanding the sketch for my illustration directly on my final surface. This really forced me to dig into my perspective knowledge and start building those skills up. The skill of seeing an imaginary perspective grid, the skill of knowing when an object isn't in the right perspective, and the skill of figuring out how to twist and maneuver it into the right perspective. Obviously, I've been making a lot of mistakes along the way, but I gain a little bit more confidence every time I freehand my sketch. For this illustration, I was working off of a roughly 2-inch by 1.5-inch thumbnail sketch to design the finalized sketch. Honestly, I think this was one of my biggest challenges yet, because there's a lot of counters in the scene that each needed to be sketched in the right perspective. I'm not gonna lie.
it was very, very nerve-wracking.
This one required some serious erasing at times, which brings me to another skill I've been working on, having confidence in the marks I make and being more intentional with them. Because erasing is so much harder to do with a colored pencil, and also because it can be very damaging to your watercolor paper, I have to be much more focused when I'm sketching. I'm no longer printing off my final sketch and tracing it with a light box. Every line I make is a brand new line. Freehanding these sketches has really helped me gain a lot of confidence in my drawing skills this year. Each time I feel a little bit braver going into it because I have past proof that I am capable of freehanding a whole illustration design. I was also designing all of the props as I went. I didn't have any prop designs from the brainstorming sketches other than the Fiona's Flavors sign. I didn't know what was going to be in the topping jars on the back counter until I started freehanding them. In a very weird way, I think freehanding is actually a lot faster for me than scanning my sketches and finalizing them digitally. I'm not nearly so nitpicky with slightly moving this prop here or tweaking this edge over there, because it's a lot harder to do that with a pencil and no Control-Z. However, I was definitely wishing for the warp tool towards the end of the sketching process when I realized that the squirrel and bunny characters were not proportional to Fiona the fox. I finished sketching the two of them, felt really good about it, looked up at Fiona and thought,
crud, you're way too small.
And because of where Fiona was positioned on the page,
I couldn't just resketch her to be smaller because then everything else would look too big.
Anywho, it was very frustrating. I had an itty-bitty tantrum, resketched the squirrel and bunny, and moved on to the painting portion. Just popping in to share that I'm currently running a big summer sale in my shop, which includes brand new prints of this illustration as well. All prints, stickers, keychains, sticker sheets, everything is 20% off August 8th through August 17th with the code SUMMERSALE24. So if you need a little summer pick-me-up, now's the perfect time. And without further ado, let's get back to the painting. Phase 3, starting the painting. My painting preparation and beginning stages of the painting process have definitely changed a lot this year too. First of all, I'm only creating a color comp like 50% of the time rather than for every single painting. Most of that just kind of depends on the illustration. For the jellyfish painting, I did a couple of color comps simply because I wanted to try out a few different options. Did I want more of a purple feel? Did I want a more blue feel? What would this color look like on this prop versus this color? Having a color comp is definitely helpful when it comes to the actual painting process because you've already made all the big color and value decisions. You know roughly what you're doing, have a little bit of a muscle memory built up for where all of the colors go and how to mix them, and the painting process then becomes a little bit more peaceful. That's not what I did for this illustration. So one of the challenges I've been giving myself for some of my paintings is to choose a color palette on the fly, to paint more intuitively and trust in my color capabilities. And let me tell you, that's never been more terrifying than it was for this illustration. This is the first interior illustration I've painted with that loosey-goosey mindset, and I think it shows in some areas. I'm not unhappy with how it turned out, but I definitely struggled a lot with picking colors as I went. But before I picked my colors, I slapped a big ol' wash of golden yellow across the whole illustration to knock out the white of the paper. Now some might say,
Allie, what's the point of painting it a solid color if you're just gonna cover it all up in the end anyways?
Great question, and I have 3 great answers. Number 1, it knocks that white page fear to the ground. The stark whiteness of the paper can be very scary to paint on, so putting a little bit of color down makes it a little less so. Number 2, it gives you something to go off of. I usually start with this wash of golden yellow simply because yellow is my favorite color. Also, I tend to paint warmer toned illustrations, but even for the cooler ones, I still tend to start with yellow. It gives me a little something to compare my colors and values to other than plain white. Number 3, it gives me a bit of an underpainting that's much more palatable to see at the end. Let's be honest, sometimes our brushstrokes don't fully overlap and you can see a little bit of the paper underneath. It happens to all of us. But there's a big difference between seeing the underpainting and seeing the stark white of the paper. The underpainting looks, worst case, like a happy accident, and best case, like an intentional color choice. Whereas the white of the paper peeking through just tends to look a little bit more floppy. Anywho, after toning my paper with the golden yellow, I soaked it in a pan of water, fully submerged for about 12 to 15 minutes. I then laid it on a soaked paper towel and began painting. This is one of the techniques I learned from Justin Donaldson's gouache course, and let me tell you, it has been life-changing. I've always loved working wet paint into wet paint, but it's very hard to keep gouache wet in the Midwest climate. Soaking my paper keeps the paint wet for a much longer time, allowing me to paint the way I like to. So here's where my painting process still kind of jumps around a little bit. Sometimes I work one section at a time, and others I like to jump around and build up the whole scene at once. Sometimes I kind of meet in the middle and render out a few things here and there while still working on the whole piece. For this one, I'm more focused on getting some of the larger areas finalized first, such as the floor and the back wall. The back wall was mostly finished within like the first hour of painting, other than adding a couple more leaves at the very end. I think it's important to try out different processes to see what works best for you. Not every technique is going to work for every person, but with trial and error, you can find the ones that you love to paint with. If you're interested in learning how to develop your own illustration from start to finish, I do have a course available in my shop where we dive a lot deeper into all the different ways we can bring an illustration to life. By the end of the PDF, you'll have a lot of different ideas for developing your own illustration process with techniques that work best for you. Anywho, next up is phase number 4, rendering. I do feel like I've honed in more on a rendering quote-unquote style this year for my paintings, especially with the Meraki Meadow illustrations. I don't really know how to describe my rendering style. Like the setting and props are a little bit more painterly, whereas the characters are kind of more shape-focused, I guess. I don't think I'm making sense to anyone other than myself, but hopefully you'll see what I mean in the video. If you've watched literally any of my videos, you know I love painting props. So much so that sometimes I have a little bit of a tendency to over-render them to the point of overshadowing the focal point, which is usually a character or two. I've really been trying this year to not do that. For example, the toppings on the back counter, my heart really wanted to render out every single marshmallow and peanut, but my hand said,
"No ma'am, that's not what we're here for."
The point of illustrations is to tell a story, and rendering out those props into oblivion would not further the story in any way. In fact, you don't even really need to know what the specific toppings are. It's enough to know,
"Oh hey, there's ice cream toppings on the back counter."
But if you were wondering, the toppings are marshmallows, sprinkles, chocolate chunks, and peanuts. Y'all, I was very, very proud of the stack of waffle cones. Usually I get very frustrated painting waffle cones because the pattern is very geometric and I struggle with that. But this time I felt like it went really, really well. One of my absolute favorite parts of this painting process was the ice cream. Huge thank you to one of my patrons for suggesting caramel pecan as an ice cream flavor. I think that is perfect for the Meraki Meadow. I really wanted to have some fun flavors for the meadow, combining some normal flavors and a couple of quirkier ones too. And of course, we had to have a PB&J flavor for our pal Bubbles. One of my biggest regrets during this painting process was not painting the ice cream counter and the counter the characters are at the same time. I mixed up what was, in my mind, the perfect shade of like this minty teal. I knew I wanted to paint both counters the same color, but I painted them on separate days, which meant I had to remix it. I mixed a color, painted the counter, and realized it was not the same, and it was not what I wanted. So I tried again, and again, and again. We're talking like 2 hours of this. In the end, we finally got there, but y'all, I was on the verge of tears. This painting definitely took me a lot longer than some of the others, I think partially because I didn't have a color comp, so I was making things up as I went. But that's where working with a limited color palette really comes in handy. I chose my tubs of paint at the beginning and left everything else on the shelf. I really wanted this illustration to be very bright, very summery, with a little bit of that retro red thrown in. And now we've come to the final phase, actually finishing the illustration. When it comes to finishing a painting, I think most of us fall into one of two categories, underfinishing or overfinishing. An underfinished painting is technically still done. It's not a bad painting, but it's lacking that last 5% of magic that brings the whole piece to life. And an overfinished painting is one that the artist just cannot step away from. You keep tweaking things and eventually kill the magic that was there in the first place. I know I, for one, have definitely been in both of these situations, and neither one of them are any fun. So in the developing an illustration curriculum, I actually made like a little finishing your illustration checklist to help me put in that last 5%, know when the illustration is finished, and step away before I kill the creativity. Finishing the illustration is a make it or break it moment. So for this one, I stepped away from it for a couple days and came back to spend one last hour on it. I realized that the back counter was just too close in value to the wall, so I used a thin layer to darken it a little bit. I then started bringing in a bit of bounce light from the floor up onto the counters. I don't think I was very effective with this, particularly on the counter that the characters are at, but you win some, you lose some, and you learn some. I also realized that the color blocks on Fiona were a little bit too light, so I darkened those a bit, and I think it helps her stand out a lot more. A lot of the finishing touches for this illustration were amping up some of the shadows and painting in the last little bits of greenery. Greenery is always an element in the Meriki Meadow illustrations, so I looked over the whole piece to make sure that I'd added enough. I loved the vines hanging down off of the stools in the coffee shop illustration, so I had a lot of fun painting those into this one as well. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this painting turned out. Of course, there are definitely some areas that could be improved upon, but part of illustrating is knowing when to call a piece done and move on to the next illustration. There are always going to be areas we can improve in. We're always learning and growing as artists, and hopefully each new painting looks a little bit better than the last one. So let's chat just a little bit about what's in store for August before we say our goodbyes. First of all, we've just started our new quest in the Curious Creatives group on Patreon, which you're more than welcome to join if you'd like. We're diving into gouache scene studies, and y'all, I am so excited. It's been almost 2 full years since my scene studies challenge ended, and I haven't painted a scene study since, so I'm really looking forward to painting some again. Because this one's a little bit of a lengthier quest, we're going to be going through it over the course of August and September just to give everybody enough time to read through the curriculum and to explore some of the different study options. I also just finished my July nurture intention, which was to create one piece of art every day using some of my old scrap papers, and I think this may be my funnest challenge I've ever done. I explored so many different mediums and subjects and just really had a good time. I'm going to be making a series of videos about the challenge soon, and I'm really excited to share what I learned with you guys. It was definitely very creatively fulfilling for me. I made a lot of pieces I'm really happy with, and it was a really amazing month. Now that we've reached August, the judging will be starting soon for the Beautiful Bazaar Art Prize. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little nervous. Honestly, the achievement was simply me entering in the first place, but you know, it would be very cool to be a finalist. I don't know, we'll see what comes of it, but honestly, I'm just really happy that I finally took a leap of faith and entered my artwork in a competition. So what else is going on in August? Honestly, July was such a busy month that I'm kind of okay maybe just slowing down a little bit for August. Maybe paint a new illustration, I don't know, we'll see. Oh, the summer sale, that was the other thing. So like I said earlier, I'm having a big summer sale in my shop at the moment, on everything from prints to courses to workbooks to stickers. All of the things are on sale with the code SUMMERSALE24. I think that's about it for August for me, so let me know down in the comments what you're going to be doing for August. Anywho, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed diving into my illustration process with me and watching me paint this Meriki Meadow piece. If you'd like to adopt a print of it, I do have a few available in my shop. Huge thank you to the Cozy and Curious Creatives over on Patreon for helping to support my art journey. Y'all are the real MVPs, and your support means so much to me. If you're looking to level up your own art skills, then head on over to watch this video next. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye guys!